Hey guys, in this episode I just want to really quickly talk about different types of switches that you can use when rewiring your car, when adding aftermarket gauges, lazy eye modifications, interior exterior lights, fog lights, those kind of things. What different types of switches you can use for those modifications and for those wiring purposes. You'd have different styles. You can have the sort of the Jetfire-like switches with the covers. You can have the simple just toggle switches, some with LEDs, some without LEDs. They come in different shapes and sizes. That's not really what's important, and that's not really what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is switches without LEDs, just a manual disconnect. That's a 2-pole switch. And switches with LEDs. So that's a switch that when turned on, a small LED will turn on, and those are switches with 3 poles. I recently transitioned from using 2-pole switches to ones with LEDs, which are 3-pole switches. And the amount of electrical headache and problems and pain that I experienced is enough to deter me from ever doing that again. And I just want to talk about why. So in a standard switch, we just remove these. A standard 2-pole switch, we have a position where these two are connected, there's continuity between them, and a position where these are disconnected, there's no continuity. This is as simple as it gets. You can wire this up and you can know you have direct control over whatever is going on in the switch. But when you move to a switch with an LED, this is a 3-pole switch, you now have an extra ground that you need to add so that this LED will turn on. If you don't add this extra ground, then it's the same thing as a 2-pole switch. You won't get that extra little LED shining, so what the hell is the point of buying it then? So when you add these extra grounds, you have to be aware of how these switches are wired internally. When the switch is off, the center, for these switches in particular, these are the ones I used in my car, the center pole and the ground pole are connected when the switch is off. When the switch is on, the 2 poles here are connected. So not the ground, not the extra ground, but just the regular 2 poles like we had in a 2-pole switch. So, when I'm on, I have what I think I have, these 2 poles connected. When I'm off, I have something connected to ground as well. And when I'm powering this as well, on the top pole here, which is plus 12 volts for the car, when this is on, some of that power is going through the switch to the ground to power that LED as well. So because I have this extra ground, depending on what kind of circuit you're wiring, if that circuit needs to see infinity, which is completely disconnected, or it needs to see ground, which is, 0 resistance, when it's off or on, this will add an extra complication. So I had switches that I needed to see infinity, infinity resistance when it was disconnected, and that's what you get with a standard 2-pole. Disconnected, infinity resistance, connected, 0 resistance, continuity. But for these new 3-pole switches, when I was disconnected, I was actually getting one of my wires connected to ground directly because of this extra pole, and that was screwing everything up. The switches weren't working, the circuits weren't working as I desired. Sometimes the LEDs will be on constantly even when the car is off. That's because still getting power from the battery, which is going to this ground, and the LED was just constantly on. In my opinion, it's not worth it. Just stick with the 2-pole switches. Simpler to wire, simpler to diagnose. You don't need this extra pole for this extra little fancy LED. It's not worth the heartache, in my opinion. But in the case that you want to have the LED, just keep in mind that extra negative pole may cause, even when your switch is completely off, may cause one of your wires to be connected directly to ground. And so just keep that in mind when you're designing your circuits and when you're designing how your wires are connected to these switches. And as always, good luck and have fun.